response to Sergeant Willie Pete, aka Infinite Wisdom, in the video My Transcended Mind versus Slave Christianity. I really want to touch on some of the things that he said at the 10-minute mark of this video when he said that, black folks really don't have their own identity to hang their hat on. Now, before we go any further, I would first like to say that I respect and admire the mind of Sergeant Willie Pete. A lot of things that he says really resonates with me, and I can relate to him on certain aspects of our lives, especially when it pertains to our upbringings. But seeing as we're from two different places on the map, in certain aspects of his philosophy and some of his viewpoints, we don't see eye to eye. And that being mainly whom we identify with and whom we identify ourselves as. My first stint in college, straight out of high school, I dropped out. And my father was very disappointed. And he cussed me out. And he said, "Benjamin, you don't go to college just to get a degree. You go to learn how to think." And I was very offended by that statement. And I'm saying, what are you saying, Pops? You saying I'm dumb? You saying I don't know how to think? But later on, when I got back into college, I found out that college helps you jog your mind and helps you think critically about certain situations. And this is where the identity aspect comes into play. Because see, I'm from middle America with strong ties to the South. And on the other side of my family, I have strong ties to the Caribbean. Ever since I was a child, my family told me, "Man, we American. We American. We're Indian. We're Indian. We have Indian in our family," etc., etc. But as I went through elementary, junior high, and high school, I was simply bludgeoned with the notion that my family came over here stuffed in the hull of a slave ship 400 or 500 years ago. And contrary to what my family was telling me, you get drilled with information enough, you will believe it. And I bought it to some extent. When I got back into college, my father was elated. And I asked him, I said, "How did you gain success in college?" And he told me, he said, "All I did, every textbook to every class, I just read the entire book. So by the time we went over it in class, I was already familiar with it. And by the time we took a test on it, I knew it. So I applied that strategy to how I was going to go about navigating my way through my scholastic endeavors. I took some basic classes starting out, history, English, math, And my history 121 class, when we talked about American history from Columbus to the Reconstruction, I bought the book and I made it my business to read every single chapter that we talked about in class. And it is how the old additive goes. You want to hide something from a Negro, you put it in a book. And what I found out is that there is a lot of information in these books, even at these universities and colleges and whatnot, that if people would just open up these books and read, they'll find some mind-blowing stuff in them. And I remember the summer before I got back into college, I went down south for a family gathering that we have every year. And it was like 11, maybe midnight at night. I'm in my grandmother's living room. It's just me and her. And we're talking. And she's telling me how our ancestry is traced back to the Aboriginal Mississippians of the Mississippi Valley. All the peoples who inhabited the Mississippi Valley River, that is whom we are descended from. And I sat back, didn't say a word, just listened, soaked it in, and I took that with me when I went to university. When I got there, my History 121 class, I said, yeah, I want to know what Columbus had to say, what Columbus saw. So I cracked these books open. And from a book that I purchased from the bookstore at my university, it says in a chapter titled America Before Columbus, and I quote, more recent archaeological evidence suggests that not all the early migrants to the Americas came across the Bering Strait. Another passage states, recent DNA evidence has identified a possible early population group that does not seem to have Asian characteristics. That's very vague and it doesn't go into detail. It leaves a lot to the imagination. But anyone can go on YouTube and see whom the earliest inhabitants of the Americas were and what their phenotype was. A few pages later, it states how Columbus came up with the term Indian, and I quote, he called the natives Indians because he believed they were from the East Indies in the Pacific. Now, when you Google East Indies, you'll see a map of East Indies, aka the Dutch Indies. And this is a map of northern Australia, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and all of those islands and landmasses in the South Pacific that are inhabited by dark-skinned Negroid people. And if you start looking at, population, pictures of the inhabitants of, let's say, Vanuatu or Papua New Guinea, you'll go on your Google image search and you'll see nothing but black people. Nappy hair, wide nose, big lips. And when I read that, a lot of things started to come full circle for me. The things that my mother, my cousins, my aunties, and uncles were telling me growing up started to make sense. The things that my grandmother told me started to make sense. Then I started asking questions as it pertains to early American history. Keep in mind, I'm in a white institution of learning. It's probably 2 or 3 other black people in my class. And I already know, hey, you're in the teacher's class, you don't challenge them. If you know it, just keep your mouth shut. If you know something, you don't even have to argue. You just keep your mouth shut and go about your business. So I just kept my mouth shut and just listened. And in my mind, I cross-examined everything that I was hearing and everything that I was reading. And the city that I'm from, here in Middle America, it's not a mega metropolis and whatnot, but it's a city of nice size. You've heard of us before, but there is a strong contingency of Africans in my city, and all throughout my 20s, I've met Africans from Nigeria, Liberia, Ghana,